for their vision and fortitude in making this monument a reality. I also thank everyone here, particularly the hardworking staff from Congress and the executive departments, for taking the time to come to this luncheon. I will do my best to give you some good food for thought that will assist you with the difficult work you have in turning information into effective legislation and policy. I will talk about three things this afternoon. Number one, the importance of the struggle for democracy in China to the long-term strategic interest of the United States and the world. Number two, the three conditions that must be present at the same time to effect a political change in a country like China. Number three, the specific foreign policies options Charter 08 presents for achieving an open, stable, democratic China. Regretfully, I was not here for last month's lecture. I understand that Bill Gates gave a very cogent summary of the security challenges facing the Obama administration. Bill observed that China's military build-up, coupled to a dictatorship that is not in any way accountable to its people, can be perceived as a growing challenge to American security. I would add to Bill's observations that China's emergence as an economic and as well as military power poses the very real question of whether the Chinese government model of one-party dictatorship without rule of law and protection of individual rights will become the model for the world in this new millennium. The very real question for us is, will China be integrated into the world community, or will China integrate the world community within its system? I urge everyone in this room to reflect on where the Chinese dictatorship was 20 years ago in 1989. It was on the brink of collapse. It was unthinkable then for everyone, including the then leaders of China, that its brand of communism would be considered by so many people in the world today as a challenge to the American model for the rest of the world. What has the U.S. done wrong in the past 20 years? Most recently, on December 8, 2008, 303 brave Chinese citizens published the Charter 08, a well-reasoned call for peaceful constitutional reform. Rather than engage in dialogue with these citizens, the Chinese government arrested Liu Xiaobo, the lead signatory, and harassed and intimidated the others. Nonetheless, about 9,000 other Chinese citizens have signed Charter 08. Like President Bush sending private envoy shortly after Tiananmen Square massacre to reaffirm his recognition of Deng Xiaoping as a legitimate leader of China, Secretary Clinton's recent remarks regarding the low priority of human rights in her discussions with Chinese leaders sends the wrong message at a particularly critical moment. Her remarks demoralized the Chinese activists and protesters, many of whom had gathered at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing for her visit to seek her support. The Chinese government can only read Secretary Clinton's remarks as giving it a free hand to exercise their arbitrary rule. The world can only see this as the rise of the Chinese political system over the weak U.S. model. As a result, I can only see greater repression of the Chinese citizens in the future and bold actions by the Chinese government on the world arena. What will our inconsistency and compromise on human rights bring us? Again, I ask you to think where the Chinese government was nearly 20 years ago. Look at where China is today. I hold up Charter 08, a virtual roadmap for peaceful transition to democracy in China, which Secretary Clinton has chosen to ignore. What course are we chartering with this mindset? If this continues, think about where the Chinese model will be 20 years from now. Will our silence on human rights eventually come back to silence us here in America? Can we hear the future Secretary of State say, we cannot let the First Amendment stand in the way of a harmonious society and economic progress? So Bill Gert's conclusion that the best solution for the challenge China presents to our security and our democratic way of life is that China has a peaceful transition to democracy. I will add to this by saying that a peaceful transition to democracy in China is not only the best outcome for America, but also the best one for China and the world peace as well. If a peaceful transition to a democratic form of governance in China is the optimum solution for removing this challenge to American security, it then follows that advancing human rights and supporting democratic forces within China must be a vital, integral, and fundamental basis of our bilateral relations with the Chinese government. It is counterproductive to compartmentalize human rights and democratic reform in our discussions with China. We cannot make progress on this issue so vital to our security by raising it only very so often when the wind blowing just right. Human rights and democratic reform must be the platform upon which all other issues are based. This brings us to the topic at hand. What are the options for American foreign policy in constructively assisting this peaceful transition to democracy in China? And what role does Charter 08 play in this transition? In China,